Hey guys, short video to answer some questions about the 150 and describe some of the mods I've done to fix problems and enhance the performance a little bit. Let me start off and say that I'm not the kind of rider that goes out and buys every aftermarket part that's offered for a bike. All of my changes, especially now with two young kids, they're all done for very specific reasons, and all of them address very real needs or change the bike to fit my personal preferences and riding style, or of course as protection against damages and things like that. So I wish I had the resources to go out and just put everything on it. Would love to experiment with a number of different things that I've looked at and are kind of exciting for the bike, but unfortunately got to stick with only the necessary things. So secondly, everything I say about the bike, keep in mind, is related to riding in the woods, okay? Several places that I ride frequently do include MX tracks. Either my practice course does, and even some of the hare scrambles I do have full motocross tracks on them. But it's a tiny percentage of what I do, and it's not a focus for me. So my bike is set up specifically and entirely for the woods. If you're a motocrosser, then you know, some of this information that I'm sharing really probably not the best source of information for you. So number one question that I get, of course, is which bike should I buy? Should I get a 150, a 250, the 250F, a 300, you know, on and on. And the answer is I have no freaking idea. It's a personal preference, and I wouldn't dare to suggest which bike is best for somebody else. However, in the last few years, I've owned a 520, 350, 250 XCF, and a 250 XC. And then beginning last year, in the summer, I picked up the 13 150. And then later in the year, in December, I got the 17 150. So that said, I do feel like I can offer a pretty good idea of the differences between the 150 and some of the other popular options out there on the market right now. So quickly, just a quick comparison versus the other bikes. Start off with the 250F. I feel like the F and the 150 are targeted at a similar group of riders. In other words, guys who like a lighter, more nimble bike that doesn't have a huge hit. And they are different though. They're very different bikes, very different bikes. And probably the best single way to characterize the differences is that the 250F is kind of like vanilla ice cream, where the 150 is more like rainbow sherbet. The F isn't exciting, but it gets the job done, and it doesn't wear you out. This is just my opinion. The 150, on the other hand, feels a lot lighter. It's more exciting. And you know, of course, the drawback, the downside to that, it does require a little more clutch work, a little more throttle work. So it's not quite as easy to ride in all places. At times, it may be even easier to ride, just the nature of the two-stroke. But there are places that the 250F is going to be a little bit easier to ride, certain conditions. Mainly, it has to do with the torque of the 250. Okay, it definitely has an advantage in torque. Of course, the 150 is faster. It's funner to ride. I've ridden around 250F, some of them highly modified. The 150 definitely, in my experience, is faster. I can run them down. Once you get rolling, the 150 is quicker and has a higher top end. So a little bit better acceleration from a rolling start as well. So both are light, but the 150 does feel significantly lighter, especially at the end of a long trail ride or at the end of a race. Okay, so bottom line, if you don't mind carrying a little more speed at the base of tough hills, if you don't mind shifting a little more often, then you might prefer the 150. If you want torque, a little less drama, then the 250F may be a better choice. Either way, both are great bikes, and I think a person would be happy with either one, and both fit the need for a smaller bike that doesn't have as hard of a hit, that allows you to focus on riding technique as opposed to trying to manage the power and the weight. So, okay, moving up to the bigger two strokes like a 250 or say a 300. If you're one of the guys that just wants more power on tap than you really need at any given time, the 150 is definitely not for you. Okay, it's more of a bike that has just enough power to get the job done everywhere, but never enough, that it's going to scare you. Okay. And actually that combined with its incredibly lightweight and nimble chassis, it makes for a bike that inspires confidence, and it's funner than any bike I've owned in 46 years of riding. This bike is just a blast to get on and take off, and if you're just going to play or if you're going to ride fast, either one, it's just fun. So can the bike go toe to toe with its bigger siblings? And in general, the answer is absolutely yes, okay? But then occasionally, no, all right? And what I mean by that, it easily keeps up when the trail gets twisty and technical, and the longer you ride, the more it shines because it doesn't wear you out nearly as badly as the bigger bikes, okay? And while the 300 will pull away in open fields, for sure, the 150 actually stays very close to the rear fender of the 250s. One of my best riding buddies, he's got the 250 XC, and we've done a number of open field comparisons, and I'm right on his rear tire when we get to the end of the straight. So it really fares well in that regard. 300 definitely will pull it once you get opened up and hitting the top gears. So it even keeps pace remarkably well up steep technical hill climbs. In fact, there are times I feel like I have an advantage riding with guys on the 300s and bigger bikes. And that's because I've noticed that they're very busy trying to control the power, control the weight of the bike, and I'm just picking lines and ripping. I mean, the bike is just, it flows so well and it moves so well, and so I'm more just having fun and just ripping up the hills where those guys at times are fighting to control things, okay? And I notice too that they have a lot more mishaps than I do on the bigger bikes due to the power and the weight. I would say the only place I would say I have a disadvantage is in deep mud or sand. I've not actually ridden in deep sand, but I've been in some mud, and having ridden the bigger bikes for many years, I do feel like on the 150, you better be prepared if you're going into a really deep, boggy mud hole. You need to pick your lines a little more carefully and be on the gas hard because it doesn't have the grunt to pull through like the bigger bikes do. Okay, sand I expect is going to be the same way. And the other place is really tough hill climbs that rely on horsepower. You get into those situations, there's really no getting around the advantage of horsepower. Okay, if that's a real big part of your riding, then maybe the one of the bigger bikes will be a better choice for you. It's not that the 150 can't climb just about everything that those bikes climb. It just takes a little better setup at the base. You got to carry more speed. You got to pick your lines carefully. And you got to be on the gas and sitting on top of the gas cap, okay? Where on the, say, a 300, you can rely on that torque to pull you out of situations and not have to be so perfect with how you do everything, okay? Another question I get a lot is, does this bike have enough grunt to pull off technical riding like rock gardens and tough technical steep hills? And the answer is yes, it does. The lightweight combined with great ergos and a motor that is surprisingly resistant to stalling help make up for the fact that it doesn't have as much grunt as, say, a 250 or a 300. So now let's talk about changes that I've made to the bike. As you can see, I did take the light off. That's just a personal choice for me. I don't ride at night anymore, and I'll end up breaking the light. So I just pulled all that off, saved a little weight on the bike, and saved the parts for later. Whenever I go to sell the bike one day, I'll have brand new parts to put back on it. So I put the, obviously you can see I put the tug straps on front and rear. Some of the riding I do is up in the mountains. It's pretty gnarly stuff, and there are times that we have to help each other out, so those come in very handy. Also at races, guys will grab your fender sometime if you get stuck in a really bad place. Doesn't happen much, but if you do, it's good to have something there for them to grab hold of instead of your fender. I've had a fender broken that way before. So put the disc guard, SRT disc guard on the rear. Didn't take more than about a half of a day's riding to bang that up pretty good. I have bent rear rotors before, so I consider that to be an essential mod. I've never bent a front rotor, been riding for 46 years. I don't know anyone that's bent a front rotor, so I don't put a front rotor guard on. Skid plate, the KTM skid plate is a real nice unit. It wraps around the frame. It protects very well, so I really like that. Another mod that I've done is down here. This bike had a very annoying chain slap that was very persistent. You can see the bike's still dirty. I got in after dark and I didn't have time to wash it, and now life has just intervened, and between soccer practice, music practice, homework, and taking care of the kids and everything, I've not had time to get to the bike. But you can see right here, if you look very closely, underneath this chain guard is a bead of shoe goo glue. I pulled the chain guard off, cleaned everything up with contact cleaner, and put a good thick bead of fresh shoe goo down from Walmart, and then bolted the chain guard back on and clamped it for a day. And the difference in the noise coming from the chain is astounding. It's just amazing. It's so quiet now. Love that modification. One of the guys that had been on my YouTube channel had recommended this to me. I'd never heard of it, so love that modification. And then I always cut out this front guard just to keep debris from packing in it. Still does the job it was intended to do, but at least it eliminates some of that packing. And then up here in the front, the stock radiator guards are much stronger, as advertised by KTM. However, they also channel tons of debris into the radiators, especially if you get out in fields, high speeds, with grass and things like that. It just channels leaves and grass and everything, packs it into your radiator. So highly recommend going to a metal type radiator guard like this. This is the Trail Tech. I don't really have any preference toward Trail Tech. I selected it solely based on this piece right here. You can see it has a guard that extends down and protects the little spigot that comes off the bottom of the radiator. So that was the only reason for going with that. Got the brake snake on here to keep limbs from catching the brake pedal, that kind of thing. Basically, any debris comes up, it just deflects off of this cable and doesn't catch your brake lever. Ooh, looks like I've at some point actually bent this brake lever in. I need to bend it back out. Obviously, you can see that it's got the Moto-vations racing suspension on it. Huge improvement. The stock suspension, the compression adjustment is virtually negligible. You can spin the clickers as much as you want from top to bottom. Just try it and you'll see. I went through that process. Negligible change in the compression damping. So that was a problem. So what I did is I went to Moto-vations Racing. It was less than $700. I got the A kit put on, and wonderful suspension now. I can really hammer rough stuff hard, and the adjustability is fantastic. You can really feel the changes in the clickers dramatically. So loving the suspension. Don't get me wrong, the stock suspension on this bike was probably the best I've ever ridden when it comes to true enduro style riding on a KTM, by far. Would have been happy with it if it wasn't for higher speed racing and that kind of thing. I consider the suspension mods necessary if you're going to, go faster. Third gear, on the pipe, hard, on up, hitting rough stuff. Fast corners, third gear, fast corners that are not smooth, that kind of thing. It'll start to buck you a little bit. To me, at my weight anyway, at 185 pounds plus gear, I'm on the very upper end for the springs. So with the stock suspension, when I started getting faster, it just really fell apart on me. So suspension was a major thing. Another really essential modification for me was this BRP chain guide back here. Not the cheapest chain guide you'll find, but I find it has done a fantastic job. And the reason I was even looking for one, I didn't damage the stock unit, but the stock unit will, if you ride in mud, which I was doing, and initially when I bought the bike in December, it was nothing but mud rides, and the stock unit has a very bad habit of packing mud onto the chain. And what it does is the chain carries it around, and then it gets scraped off up here in the counter sprocket and starts packing up there. And next thing you know, you've got mud everywhere on the bike, and it was taking me upwards of 10 minutes to get the mud out of the bike from being packed. In fact, it was packing so tightly behind the counter shaft sprocket that I was afraid it was going to cause damage to the seals ultimately. I was having to dig it out with a screwdriver. So the first ride with the BRP told me that problem was solved. The BRP is very smooth, low friction, and apparently the way it's designed, maybe there's a little more room in there. I don't know what it is, or maybe the stock unit just catches mud on a seam. I didn't study it. I just put the BRP on here, and the problem was totally gone. Not even a hint of it anymore. So loving it. It's taken a couple licks and it's held up really well, so it's a tough unit. That's what I'm going to put on all my bikes now. I really like it. So another mod I went with is the tubeless. I don't know why more people aren't doing it, except I guess they're just like me. I was afraid of the added complexity. I thought it might be more difficult. I'd been doing tires and tubes all my life, and I felt like I had it down. I guess I just didn't want to learn any new tricks, but I got a pretty good deal on a set, front and rear. I hadn't put the front on yet, but I put the rear on and absolutely love the tubeless. I can run 4 psi and no fear of flats, and the traction is just amazing. And if you follow the procedure exactly as it's described, what I did is I just set up my laptop, and screen by screen I went through it and installed it exactly like they said. I chose to use soapy water for installation and just used a ton of it, and it was easier than a standard tire change, definitely. So really loving it. I will point out though that if you look at the tire I've got on here, it's a V-rubber tacky tire. Probably got about 15 hours on it. It's already starting to get a little bit of chunking going on, still gripping exceptionally well, so it's still got some pretty good life in it. However, it's the smallest V-rubber they make, and it is certainly too big. It's a 110, but it feels more like a 120 to me. Weighs 14.5 pounds. And against my own best advice that I gave initially on this bike, when I started the Thumper Talk thread review on the bike, I said to go with a 100 on this bike. That was based on my experience with this, with the 150 that I have right here. It has the 100 on it, but I really wanted the V-rubber for some really gnarly technical mountain riding. and so I bought it, and sure enough the traction is awesome, but the tire's just a little too heavy for this bike in my opinion. So I'm gonna have to find something lighter or go back to more of a standard like this Starcross medium on the 13150. One of my favorite mods on the bike are the flex bars. The flex bars I have swapped back and forth between this 150 and the 13150, and it's the first thing you notice when you get on the bike. The flex bars really do help. They take away a lot of that initial impact when you hit sharp edged bumps. So otherwise you don't really notice them other than the weight. You can feel the weight of them going back and forth between regular bars and these. If I had it to do over today, I would probably look at some of the other options that are lighter. They have some pretty awesome looking bars on the market now that flex. They look like they flex at least as much as the flex bars, and they're of course the weight of them is you know, much less, more like a regular bar, maybe even lighter. I don't know. So if I were doing it over, I would look at that. The great thing about these kind of options, like those bars and the flex bars, they go from bike to bike. These bars actually were on my 06 YFZ 450, raced with them there, and then went to a 520, I mean a 250, and then a 350, and had them on this 13150 for a little while, and now on this 150. So you make the investment once, and you know, it's something you keep moving from bike to bike, even to an ATV in my case. So as you can see, I am not running bark busters. I actually have bark busters for these bars. I've run bark busters religiously. I put them on the minute I buy the bike for I guess 20 years now. And when I got the 13150, at that time I still had my 350, and had the bark busters on there with the flex bars. So I rode without the bark busters and really enjoyed it. So when I got the 17, I decided to try without them for a while, and I guess at this point it's been over a year I've been riding without the bark busters. So I don't recommend it for everybody. They've probably saved me from breaking my fingers numerous times, especially early on when I was a little more reckless and maybe didn't have quite the precision in my steering that I have now. So don't recommend it for everybody, but if you are pretty precise with your steering and you enjoy the light feel of running without, and also the decrease in the bar width, then it may be something that that you'd want to look at. With the bark busters on these bars, it adds a full inch of width to the bars. So even at 30 inches in width, which is what I run typically, you're adding another whole inch to the width of the bike, and I do find that that makes a difference in the tight woods. So the great thing about these flags, and I assume that other aftermarket flags you could probably set up the same way, they do extend out beyond the bar just a little bit, probably ½ inch, something like that, and maybe a little bit more. And so when you're starting to get a little close, getting a little too aggressive, I start feeling and hearing the flags hit the trees, so it tells me to back down a little bit. And I also, part of running just flags, in my opinion, is running shorter levers. If you don't, then you might want to invest in maybe an unbreakable lever, or one of the levers that will bend. It will articulate when the bike falls, because obviously without the protection here, the wraparound of a bark buster, then your levers are at risk anytime the bike falls over. So the shorties, I have found when I cut them off like this, I like to run with one finger on the clutch and two on the brake. When they're cut like this, I have yet to break a lever in a fall. So anyway, something to consider, something to think about, just a personal preference for me. Wanted to show you the defect I found in the stock reed cage. I'm gonna see if this is gonna show up with this camera. Okay, if you look in here, you can see the air gaps. I'm looking directly into the intake side of the reed cage. You can see the light in there. Let me hold it up toward the sun, well, the setting sun. You can see how large the air gaps are in there, top and bottom. Basically 4 out of the 8 quadrants inside the stock reed cage, we have some pretty substantial air gaps. Okay, now what I did was I purchased a Vforce and put it in, and noticed some pretty significant improvements. So I wanted to mention this to you guys. The really important point, I guess, is that I was able to make this defective reed cage work, but it's not a good solution by any means. Basically what I did was overcompensated for the richness that this was creating by jetting lean. And periodically, when I was riding the bike, depending on how I was riding it, I would burn off the excess fuel and I would be in a lean condition. And thanks to some astute observations from some of the guys on Thumper Talk that watched my videos, got me to working on this, and I figured out it was the reed cage. I really did not think I had a problem because I had the bike running fairly well. I had just jetted around the problem. So now with the Vforce in, the bike actually starts and idles way better than what it did before. Much easier to crank it, and then it idles very smoothly. And up on top, I was able to go back to the 480 main jet from the 470, and now up on top it very consistently pulls hard and strong, and there's not any of the surging that I was experiencing before. So much faster up on top as well. So if you do still have the stock reed cage in, I think it's well worth your time to take about 15 minutes and pull it out and inspect it with a good strong light behind it, and look for those air gaps. So one thing I would like to point out, I did take out the progressive power valve spring very early, and it's very easy. Just take these bolts off, pull the assembly out, remove the small spring, and put in my case, the yellow spring. A lot of guys are saying they like the red if you want it to hit a little bit harder. I prefer the yellow more than likely. I've not actually tried the red yet, but if it hits harder, then for the type of riding I do in the mountains where it's slick and rocky, the yellow is probably going to turn out to be better. I am going to try the red. It's only about $1.50, something like that, or less. So I'm going to give it a shot. I've also experimented with backing out the adjuster on the power valve. I've turned it in and I've turned it out. In the end, with the yellow spring, I prefer the stock setting, which is about 13 millimeters of preload on the spring. As I back it out and take some of the preload off the power valve spring, I feel like the bike becomes a little less forgiving on slick roots and rocks and things like that. Honestly, I didn't feel a whole lot of difference turning it in. I guess I would have needed to go further. I'm not a big fan of turning the adjuster a huge amount either direction. But at any rate, I went back to the stock setting. As you can tell, I made a punch mark there and then there, and you use that to help keep track of where you're at on your adjustment. And I'm back with the 2 punch marks lined up again at the stock setting. So okay, so in summary, the 150 is incredibly light, nimble, stable, Has a very versatile motor. It works great in slow technical areas. It blitzes tight sections like a champ, and yet can absolutely rip out in the open. It's one of the funnest bikes on the market. Now, the disadvantages include you're going to be a little busier with the clutch and throttle at times, and it doesn't have the grunt to run with the bigger bikes in certain types of terrain. So, pros and cons. Hopefully the descriptions that I've put out there can help you a little bit. And one more thing to mention, a lot of people ask about this. I'm getting well over 3 hours of riding per tank of gas. Actually, I've hit 3.5 hours on occasion. So, bike has a tremendous range. I'm usually the very last one that has to worry about fuel. In fact, I've never had to. Everybody else has long since needed to go back to the truck, and I'm still, sitting there with half a tank of fuel usually. So that's a nice little plus.
Whoa!